Greetings, Warlords. Raj here. Welcome to Saga Thursday, the show all about the skirmish miniatures game from Studio Tomahawk. We're joined once again by fan favorite Patrick. Patrick, how's it going?
Going well, Raj. How you doing?
Good. So we have an interesting discussion lined up today. You kind of pinged me with some juicy thoughts here, and I was interested in discussing them further on video, on a recording for everybody. And it's actually quite timely as well, because last week we kind of had, basics to building a warband with Stan. So, just when do you take Hearthguard? When do you take Warriors? When do you take Levy? When do you take a heavy weapon versus having a dude mounted? And so just kind of leading people through that. But it was a more kind of basic discussion, kind of geared towards beginners. And I think it was probably pretty helpful. Hopefully it gives a framework to a beginner. But Patrick, you've been playing Saga for quite a while, and you've got excellent kind of write-ups on different factions and tactics and stuff like that on your blog. Your blog's still going, Patrick? Is that still up?
Yeah, it's still up and running. I had a little delay. Work got really busy for the last few months, but it's starting to slow down. So I'm going to be posting some stuff soon.
Okay. Now, what was the address for that again?
It's Southeast Saga. It's sesaga.com.
Yep. So it's like 6 digits, sesaga.com. So we had kind of the basics last week for the beginners, and now we're going to kind of delve into some higher level concepts and ideas and ways of thinking about things. And you kind of sent me some outline. Yeah, this is just one part of like a larger outline here, and maybe at some point we'll have you back on to kind of go deeper into some stuff after this. But so you kind of thinking about troops differently, and you're kind of grouping them kind of by function: skirmisher versus shock troop. And if we were playing a different game, Warhammer Ancients or something like that, those would be like two distinct profiles of troops that you would recruit in your force, and they had special rules to reflect their kind of different roles. Well, in Saga, you just got the Hearthguards, the Warriors, the Levy. They have different equipment options that can kind of delineate them in some ways. But, it's really kind of how you use them on the table and maybe what Saga abilities you play with them that would kind of delineate a shock troop from a skirmisher, per se. Am I on the right track here to where we're going, Patrick? Or how do you think about it?
You're right. Yeah. No, I think I find it very helpful to break the troops down into different categories. Other than like, I'm not talking about like Levy, Warrior, Hearthguard. I'm talking like, your shock troops versus skirmishers. And the reason for that is, one, you're going to maximize the troop utility because you're going to play it appropriately. So and the variables when you're looking at that, are the troop, whether it's a Warrior, Levy, or Hearthguard. But is it mounted? Is it on foot? What kind of weapon does it have? You can have for example, frontline troops that are either a Levy, a Warrior, or a Hearthguard, depending on how you outfit them. And so, but by put them in categories, you understand how you're going to play them. You can, one, I think, balance out your army more efficiently. And then finally, it kind of helps me with deciding my deployment,
Sure.
Like where am I going to place troops at the beginning of the game? And it makes a little bit better decision making, and hopefully leads to more success during the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So instead of kind of starting from the bottom up, I've got these Levy. Where do they fit in? You're thinking frontline troop. I need frontline troops. Which of these units can I slot in here to meet that requirement, per se? And so we can, we'll just say that the categories you have, split them out. We'll go into each one kind of individually, but this will kind of set up the overall framework. But so we have frontliners, shock troops, skirmishers, and then you have a skirmish shock troop category. So
and support troops.
Support troops. Okay.
I didn't get that outline completely done before I sent it.
Oh no. Okay. Well, that's fine. So, so is every warband going to cover all those bases, or
not necessarily? You have to look at the troops that you have available, and then certain warbands will have more of one versus the other. And there are some warbands that are very versatile in that you can do a lot with them. For example, like the Carolingians, you can field them in a lot of different variety. Whereas if you look at like the Numidians, you're going to have a lot less selection.
Sure. Yeah.
So I mean, those are two very contrast, type factions. So, but understanding what kind of troop you have will help you with your play style. So like in your last video, you talked about a point of Hearth Guards, 4 points of Warriors, and a point of Levy.
Yeah, that was kind of just the basic starting point. If you don't know what you're doing, that's as good a spot as any to jump in. Now
you want to look at, well, I need some support troops. Do I want to take those out of my warriors, or do I have better selection with the levy? My front line, do I want to use warriors, Hearth Guards, or levies for that? And look at your options. But then like you're filling in all those voids. Depending on the board and what it's going to allow you and the troops that you have. So, like I've been playing the Huns a lot recently, and they're a heavy skirmish. But I still put in shock troops there to finish off targets. And they've got a different front line than I use with a different faction. But that troop, it's got certain requirements that are going to be similar, no matter whether you're fielding a levy, warrior, or a Hearth Guard as your front line.
Okay, cool. Well, let's dive into kind of each category. We'll kind of flesh it out, and then once we go through that, we can kind of circle back around and kind of look at the big picture again. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So up front, we've got the front liners. So what troops for you are frontliners? What would you kind of slot into this category?
Well, from a general standpoint, I'm going to want someone with high armor, usually like a 4 or better. And I'm going to use foot troops, because for a frontliner, you want to be able to close ranks.
Sure.
And I know some people like to do that, some people don't. But I always look at closing rank as like a saga ability. So that's an extra dice to play. And then I'm looking for something where I can get high numbers, because I know there's going to be attrition on it. So my typical troops that I'm going to select, my first choice would be the standard levy. Basically, if you've got levy with a sword and spear, or shield and spear, or a standard warrior, and then sometimes I've fielded standard Hearth Guard. If the board will allow me to do that, there are some advantages with having the Hearth Guard in the front if you've got the board for it, because they've got more they'll last a saga dice a lot longer, because they go down to the last man. If you've got a lot of defensive abilities on your board, sometimes having a Hearth Guard unit in the front can be an advantage, because you still generate a saga dice down to the last man. So
just having defensive type saga abilities is kind of
if you've got those
makes you consider for the Hearth Guard.
If you've got something that allows you, say, to re-roll defense roll, 1s or 2s, or you get a +1 to defense dice, or you can gain defense dice. If you've got a board that has stuff like that, that's going to empower your frontliners, and maybe you want to try using a different troop. not a lot of boards have the standard levy, which make a really good front line.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a more like a hierarchy, probably. If you've got those no special equipment levy, those will probably be your best frontliners. They're going to be up there, kind of waiting to be charged, perhaps. They need to close ranks. They're going to have attrition. So obviously the levy excel in that with no special equipment. If you don't have those, then there's no special equipment warriors if you can take them, and then occasionally the Hearth Guard if you've got the right kind of defensive abilities. But even boards that don't support or have defensive abilities, you'd be surprised that taking, like with Pagan Peoples, they shoot the tar out of you, and they don't really have any defensive abilities to speak of, apart from weird little things that kind of put fatigues on stuff here or there. But just having like a unit of 10 or 12 warriors just by itself, there's no defensive abilities to soup it up, but just being armor 4, being able to close ranks, I think, just brings a value to that particular warband, even if you don't have the saga abilities necessarily to back it up.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on that. If I don't have the no special equipment levies, my front line is going to be, 10 or 12 warriors. They've got amazing holding power, and even just the act of closing ranks. And every once in a while, I've thrown a dice in the combat bonus to pull out an extra defense dice if I know I'm going to.
Sure, yeah, almost every board can do that.
Yeah.
Because you think armor 4, half the hits will miss, and closing ranks, half the hits that get through will also miss. So it takes 4 attacks to pling one guy, and the average unit is 8, so it's like 2 guys going against a 12 pack. You're going to be there quite a while.
Yep.
And so frontliners, you kind of talked about the deployment aspect. So these are going to go front and center.
Absolutely.
Typically,
what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my strongest frontliners close to the objectives that I want. Or, if there's no objectives, then I want to control an area, typically the center of the board. So I'm going to put them front and center. If I've got to go after some objectives or something like that, then I'll tend to play them to that side of the battlefield. But I'm going to put them where I expect the main battle to occur. And then they're going to be supported by the support troops and the shock troops. And, hopefully they're going to hold for, several turns. And I can use them. Mainly I'm using them to put fatigue on the opponent. And then that makes them vulnerable to a charge by the shock troop. But, that's what I'm trying to do. And so I'm trying to either shield troops, my shock troops, control an area with those. And so they're going to take the brunt of the attacks, and that's going to keep the attacks off maybe my more vulnerable but harder hitting troops, that way.
Okay. And we kind of talked about numbers a little bit. So the levy, obviously you want nice big packs. For the warriors, are you thinking bigger units here as well, if you can get away with it?
Yeah, I'll usually I'll field 10.
10. Okay. Yeah.
It's like if I can get 12, I will. But like when I play Spanish, I've got 10 frontliners. I want those guys to last through, turns 4 or 5. And so I'll have 10 of those on there. And other, other factions, if I can't get the levy, then I'm usually fielding a big unit of warriors. And I know like a beginner, maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe they just want to keep everything simple and do 8. But at some point, after you get some games going, having that front line that's going to hold and take some hits is vital into controlling an area. Once you get, if they break through that front line early, well, you're going to be in trouble because your support troops now are vulnerable. Your shock troops now, which usually don't have great armor, you know, they're vulnerable. And as long as you can keep the opponent focused on those frontliners, you have an advantage because they're hitting a brick wall and they're getting fatigued for it, and that sets them up for counterattacks or counter strikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And then, too, you also mentioned way at the beginning, just maintaining that Sagadai. So going from 8, you lose 5 guys,
Mm-hmm.
you get down to 3, you lost that die. Where 10, I like that 10 number. Going down, losing 7 guys is a little tougher. We said just an average combat, you'll lose 2 guys.
Mm-hmm.
So you could take, 3 or 4 combats. I mean, if they're souped up, it's 2 or 3, or maybe 2 if you're a little unlucky or something like that. But
Yeah, I mean, you always have the dice with, that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And but as long as you're trying to hold that Saga dice for a long time. And honestly, that's like the only advantage. Well, it's not the only advantage, but like the Hearthguard, if I do take those, it's obviously because I don't have the levies and I don't want to use that many warriors. The only advantage they have, besides like the higher armor class, is that they generate a Saga dice down to the last man. But even that, you're gonna have to use 6. Like if you use 4, they're probably gonna go down pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's costly. It's a point and a half. But like you can get by. If you look at you're doing 10 warriors, that's not a point and a half. So you're getting more bang for your buck, I think, out of the warriors than the Hearthguard.
Yeah, I think so. With 4 Hearthguard, typically they got 1 combat in them, and then they're done.
Yeah, exactly.
unless you set it up like exquisitely against this exhausted unit, you went in, because even if you just give them 1 or 2 attacks, you're gonna get that 6 to hit. You're gonna fail, and it's not fair. We all know the Hearthguard shouldn't be treated this way, but it always is. So,
right.
Having that 6 pack, you can at least take two combats, which is kind of like what we were saying with the frontliners. You're going to be able to receive multiple attacks over the course of the game, and so a 4 pack, unless everything's going perfectly, your Saga dice are exquisite, you got the right board, is probably not going to be happening with the 4 packs. All right, cool. Well, anything else to say about the frontliners?
Yeah, when you're, like in your battlefield maneuvers with the frontliners, I don't charge with them. I keep pressing them forward, goading a charge. And the reason for that is I want to play them defensively. And when I charge, I can't close ranks. And so I risk losing more troops in the melee. Now, that's not to say that I won't charge with them. In some games, I have charged, and it's been like a pivotal thing, but that's kind of a surprise. And it's usually occurring later in the game after they've taken a few hits, and then all of a sudden, but they have a juicy target that's got a lot of fatigues, and I need that 1 charge, and there's nothing else available, and they come in. But what I'm trying to do is wait for them to get hit. I'm closing ranks, maybe playing ability, maybe just popping a combat bonus. Matter of fact, that happened the last game. I threw a dice in a combat bonus because I didn't get the right rolls to play my defensive ability. So I just threw the dice in combat bonus, popped out a defensive dice, and that single dice saved my bacon. I was like, I am so glad I threw that in there, because I was like, man, that was the one that canceled the hit, So
Sure,
I came out unscathed. Everything else whiffed.
Kept you at a 4-man unit, first going to 3 or something.
I saved my Saga dice with that 1 combat bonus. But I didn't get the Saga rules to load my defense ability, which is usually pretty good. But I was able to pull that 1 combat bonus as a defensive dice, and that was helpful. But again, my goal with the frontliners is to push, control an area, protect my other troops, but also lay that fatigue on the opponent. While they're, banging their heads against that brick wall, they don't realize they're getting set up. Those fatigues are building up, and I'm gonna come in and hit you hard once I've got those fatigues on you.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, we've only got the 8 Saga dice. You're lucky if you get to roll all 8. Yeah, but we've got limited actions, and so you're going to use those Saga dice on more valuable your shock troops or something else. And so the other thing too, a lot about Saga is learning when to charge and when not to charge. A lot of times you can screw yourself over with a charge. But if you want these guys to last too, if you charge on your turn, that means you're going to have a fatigue for the other guy's turn. And so it's going to be that much easier for them to grind through. So if you want them to stick around, that's their role as the frontliners. Just rest off, get back to that 4-4, armor 4, block on 4, and just the priorities to maintain that with the frontliners.
Absolutely. You're trying to slough that fatigue. You're trying to get that fatigue off the frontliners and get ready to take a hit on the next turn. You're not letting that build up on them, and that's why I don't charge with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, let's move on. The next one down here, we've got the shock troops. So what for you in the game of Saga, how does that translate as far as the troop types and equipment and stuff like that?
Well, for me, I'm looking for something that's fairly mobile. That could be, you might have an ability on your board to increase movement, or you might have mounted troops. But I'm also looking for something that's going to have an attack bonus. And so you're looking at, something with either a heavy weapon or a javelin, because they get +1 on attack. Now, there are some mercs that get some nice bonuses when they charge.
Oh, yeah.
So you can use, there's some mercs that make great shock troops. You and I both play the Norse Gale, and the ultimate shock troop, merc for them.
Friends, the Galgadel.
Exactly. Yes. They are the shock troop that, but I'm looking for something that can go in and hit hard. Maybe it's got lower armor, but it's going to be a hard hit. So, heavy weapons, either warriors or Hearthguards, mounted Hearthguards or warriors, just straight up, because of the mobility factor. I use mounted warriors in the order stats for a shock troop. Once there's a fatigue on there, they'll come in. They still have armor 4, so I can use that fatigue to bump them up to 5. Or I can use that fatigue to lower the armor of the opponent if I so choose. And then, mounted javelin troops, or even foot warriors with javelin. We'll talk about those when you get to the crossover skirmish shock troop. But they can be very valuable, but you have to be very skilled in using them. We'll talk about that later. But those are the kind of troops that I like to look for when I'm doing that. I know in that last video, was it Alan? I think it was Alan. Said he loved that heavy weapon, that +1. I'm using that +1. I think is really good for a shock troop. They're coming in. Now you remember, you're usually using a shock troop on a unit that has a fatigue. You're trying to keep them fresh. They're going to go in and hit hard on a unit with fatigue. So you've got the choice of using that to bump up your armor or doing more damage.
Sure, yeah, going from a 3 to a 2, you've got the option to take yourself up, or just I'm going all in on just wiping you out here because I'm going for a fatigue bomb or something like that. I'm gonna let it all ride.
One of my favorite shock troops is a 5-pack of Danax warriors in the Norse Gale. Because with Howling Axes, I can double that to 10.
10, yeah, easily, yeah.
Yeah, it's just you pop Howling Axes, you gain 3 dice, you pop a combat bonus, you gain 2, and now you've maxed out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here, I know they're gonna die, because there's only 5 of them, but I'm trading up. I'm gonna kill more than they can kill me. Because my limit is 5. I'm not gonna lose that many. But if I can go in and wipe out 8 warriors with that, or finish off some Hearthguard with them, to me that's a win because I'm trading up.
Hmm.
And so that's why I'm using. They're a great shock troop, for example, doing that.
Sure. So you mentioned kind of an understrength unit there. So, we talked about bigger units for the front line. So are we thinking for shock troops, you want to be understrength or maybe just be at the kind of the standard 8 warriors or something like that?
I think it kind of depends on your board a little bit.
Okay.
The Norse Gale, it really lends itself to that 5-pack of warriors. Um, but a lot of times, a 4-pack of Hearthguard mounted, um, work well for a shock troop because they can come in strike from a long distance. And the reason that distance is important is like I can keep them behind the front line and away from combat, so they're coming in fresh. So now I've got that fatigue advantage. That's why I'm trying to do that. But there's every faction has, if you look at every faction, I'm sure there might be one or two that maybe not, because I don't know all 75 of them. But most of them you can create a shock troop. Like there's usually something there. Like you can create. You play the pagan people, right?
Yeah.
All right. Is there a shock troop available?
Yeah, they've got the heavy weapon, Hearthguard, and Hearthguard with javelins. So
right.
Definitely.
There's something there, and the shock troop, they're vulnerable usually to a counterattack. So like I'm typically not going to send in a big unit because they're going to get counterattacked on that, and I just want to minimize my losses on that. But maybe your board doesn't allow that. Maybe you don't have the abilities to gain enough dice or to juice the dice up a little bit. So maybe you have to go in a little bit bigger and use 6 Hearthguard. But I don't know. It's every board is differently, but I tend to know that like when I'm going in with a shock troop, once I go in, my goal is to kill more than they, I want to cause more casualties than
disproportionate.
Yeah, disproportionate. So by limiting the number of troops in that, you have potential of. Let me tell you a story real quick. This will illustrate. I got a tournament one time. I was playing in Spanish. I had my frontliners out, pushed them forward, and the guy was playing the Normans, and he had a 8-pack of Hearthguard, and he came in and hit my front line. Now he thought he had a big win, but that front line had already been hit twice, so they were depleted, and he wiped them out, completely wiped them out. Right. Well, the very next turn, every single one of his Hearthguard was dead. He just lost 2 points of Hearthguard because now they're sitting in the middle of the field with fatigue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So, I know that 8-pack is tempting, but it can come back to get you. You know what I mean? And you said it yourself, Hearthguard, for example, like, a 4-pack of Hearthguard, they got 1 or 2 combats in them, So, but it's whatever you want. But I tend to, my shock troops aren't necessarily super large,
Yeah, it's really going to be kind of board dependent, like you say. So with like the Vikings or the Norse Gales, there's ability for the Vikings. They can easily just get 5 extra attacks, lower your armor by 1. So that would kind of lead you to say, well, I can just take 5 warriors, double it up, and that's a nice little shock troop. Same with the Norse Gales, where if I'm thinking like my Carthaginians, there's no way to get additional dice, attack dice ever.
Yeah.
There's some rerolls, some exploding 6s. So my shock troops there are basically maxed out. I was doing 11-man javelin warriors. They can shoot, they'll do other things, but those were my heavy hitters.
Yep.
If I wasn't taking the heavy chariots, which are also just a way to get a bunch of attack dice. So you might very well be taking big shock troop units, like you say, like 10 or 12 warriors, 5 or 6 Hearthguard if that's what you're bored. Some are just kind of re-rolls. Some will give you lots of dice and you can go smaller there, but some are gonna kind of force you into larger units just to be able to stack up those attack dice into something meaningful.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, yeah, you're right. It's board dependent. You've got to look at it. I agree with that. But what I'm trying to do is find that was a good choice in my opinion, using Warriors with Javelin for your shock troop. I think that's really a great option. And it can really, we'll talk about it later, but there's a really nice combo with that.
Definitely. All right. Well, let's move on to the skirmisher, the humble skirmisher. So are we skirmishers are always equipped with missile weapons or not?
Yeah, the skirmisher, I in my opinion, and you can disagree with me, I think they're the hardest troop type to play. People have difficulty with skirmishers and playing with them. But yeah, they're mobile. They typically have a ranged weapon. For most time, for me, I'm going to classify it as a javelin or the composite bow. And the javelin has a range of M. It's got 1 free shoot without fatigue, and then it gets a +1 to charge if the target's not in solid cover. The composite bow is a free shot with no fatigue, but you can't shoot twice in a consecutive. You've got to do another activation in between. Mm-hmm. And I think those two weapons are more complicated, and so people kind of forget about, I forgot to apply my +1 charge or to the chart, or things like that. So they're a little bit more complicated to play, the skirmishers. And then the other thing I think that makes them tough is they require really good positioning to use effectively.
That's right. Yeah.
And in my opinion, I've had a lot of difficulty with large units of skirmishers, so I don't tend to go above 8 because I find if I start getting like a unit of 10, I can't get them all within M just because of the terrain or something, and so I'm not utilizing the dice as much. So I take smaller units, but
yeah, I agree. So it's definitely tougher to use kind of composite bow warriors versus the one skirmish I would say is probably the easiest to use to be the javelin levy, is probably the most forgiving because they have the numbers on their side and the positioning. You try to get them in, but if not, that's fine. But kind of the warriors with the javelins and the composite bows, I think, are a little trickier to use. And then if you could somehow have Hearthguard with that equipment, doubly so.
Yeah, to me, I think the javelin levy on foot are like the quintessential skirmisher. Just the classical sense. I mean, they were run up to the line, chuck their javelins, and then get out of dodge. Mm-hmm. But I think they're a lot easier to play than the mounted ones. I think people get a handle of those a lot quicker than the mounted ones. But because usually you're keeping them a little bit closer.
Yeah, let's talk about deployment then. Mm-hmm. So, if you think about historical battles or whatever, the skirmishers are kind of in front of the front line, but mm-hmm. It sounded like your front line's your front line and the skirmishers are maybe somewhere else, or would they be in front?
Let's take a look at the javelin foot levy, because mm-hmm. They're probably the most common skirmisher.
Many war bands can take them.
Yeah,
if not most.
And so what I like to do is I'm going to place them fairly close to the front line, but back just a little bit. What I'm trying to do is encourage the opponent to charge the front line and not those guys. So I might advance the front line and advance the levy, but they're going to be back just a little bit.
Okay.
and then after they take a charge, the front lines take a charge, I can move those skirmishers forward, take a shot, and then maybe come in with a shock troop after that from the other side. So maybe I've got my javelin guys on the left flank, I got shock troops on the right flank, and then I just do a 1-2, and then those skirmishers have hopefully taken one or two out with the shooting, and that makes it easier for the shock troops to finish the job. That's one of the ways that I like to play them. Like I use them a lot in the Ordenstat on the, when I'm pushing forward with the Warlord, for example. And so they're going to, move in. Like with the Warlord, I'm using him with a heavy weapon, and I'm going to charge in with him. So those guys will go forward and get a shot off, and then the Warlord will come in. And then they also support the Warlord too with some of the abilities there. But that's why I put them there. But usually I have them close to the front line. The reason I don't put them on the front line necessarily, I will occasionally, I'll explain that, is I want to get that first shot off with 6 dice. If I put them out in open, they might get riddled with, support troops with long-range missiles. Maybe they get charged from, a mobile unit or something like that before I get a chance to close the distance. Because sometimes, and this happens like with the Norse Gale, you're dealing with distance problems. So, nothing in the Norse Gale, everything's a range of M, right? So if I'm dealing with a faction that has L either in shooting or movement, I'm going to have to take some hits and stuff. And so I'm probably moving those units forward, and trying to, move in there and try and avoid taking too many hits. When I'm dealing with that, I'm using terrain like crazy. So I'm moving them in terrain, around terrain,
So that's going to be kind of one thing I was going to chime in here. So this is kind of where terrain is going to enter the discussion, where the skirmishers, you don't really want them on the front line, and you're going to use the frontliners to create a barrier to them. So it's going to take multiple moves or something to get at them. They'll have to spend a lot of resources to go after them. And so the other thing you can do is get them into terrain. It's going to create that same kind of barrier, where it's going to be multiple moves, or you're going to have to do multiple shots to be as effective and do that kind of damage. And so, if they got to be behind the front line, that's what they'll do. But, sometimes Saga boards can get pretty congested if there's no objectives out there. So oftentimes, there's just kind of a natural lane for these guys to run into and get in the woods, the field, the rocks, or whatever.
Yeah. Terrain, I think, is one of the best places to put them, if you can. And I'll do that a lot. I'll actually, sometimes I'll lay terrain down to, like connect the dots. Okay, I'm going to jump into this train. Then I'm going to jump, so I'm moving my javelin levy guys across the board, hopping from one train to the next, trying to get them down the battlefield without getting shot to pieces. They do have good armor against shooting. I mean, it's 4. But I still want to try and get some shots off with them, before they get mowed down too much. Ideally, like for me, I'm trying to use those guys to take out the long range shooters. Because when you get close to those with those levy guys, they can chuck some javelins and then charge in. And
just kind of gum it up,
Yeah,
fatigues all around.
Exactly.
I could be plunking my shock troops. But yeah, and I like what you said about just having those 6, trying to ensure they get the 6 dice volley off, at least, kind of their opening. Because, talking about levies again, it's an uncommon die typically to get them moving. And so 6 dice for an uncommon, that's a slam dunk. And plus, at the start of the game, 6 dice, anything can happen on that first 6 dice, and it can have a really huge impact on the game. If you get the one lucky volley was the very first one that you did, you can have a huge impact on the game. So, maybe you fluff it, but just giving yourself the opportunity to do that where they don't, you're not exposing them and they get dinged down a couple, they got some fatigues and you're only going to get 4 or 5 shots. Now you got some hard decisions to make on, where you're going to allocate your resources, where if they just go in fresh and try to endeavor to get that sweet shot, I think that's a good way to think about it. Especially if you're kind of a newer player, kind of jumping into the deep end here with us.
Yeah. One thing I've done too is I put them right behind the frontliners, and if they get hit, the frontliners get hit. They're going to be S away from the opponent. Well, if the levy are right behind the frontliners, just laterally move the front line, and then you can move those levy forward and they can take a shot. And that's one way of doing it. One other thing that you can do with the levies, just remember that you get that free shot with no fatigue. Sometimes I will double activate them and I get 2 shots. If especially for that 6, like in the early game, where I get
6 and 6,
I'll do the free shot first. And then, like say I'm moving forward and I'm shoot for free, and then I activate them to shoot again, and they do not get the fatigue until after the shooting, so the opponent cannot raise their armor. So like, especially if I've got a juicy target, and for them, I'm looking for, something with low armor, and, and if I can take out, like with Norgales, if I can take out the bow warriors or bow unit, bow levy with them, that's great. But you'd be amazed at how many hits you're going to get with 12 dice rolling. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, well, let's pop down to the skirmish shock troop combo. So how does this different or similar to what we've already gone through?
Well, the skirmishers, like the classic skirmisher, the javelin guys on foot, you've got those, they're chucking stuff. And then you've got the composite bows where they're just running up and shooting and then retreating. And the trick with them is to stay within L plus S. But then there's another type of troop, which I think is a valid one, is the skirmish shock troop. And that has to do with your javelins. Now, what you need to focus on is like your shock, your skirmish shock troops are not going to be levies, because the levy, they only generate 4 attack dice, which is not significant unless you've got an ability that adds a lot to it.
I would say, yeah. So some boards, they're just stuck at 4, and that's what it is. But some boards you can get them up to 8, or perhaps even higher with some shenanigans. So just depending on the board, I wouldn't necessarily rule them out, but I think what you're saying is a buckload of attacks with the
That's
javelins.
why my preferred skirmish shock troop is either a warrior unit or a Hearthguard unit with javelins. I'm not saying the levy aren't, but you have that low dice. But like if you've got a unit, say of 7 warriors with javelin, maybe they've had a little bit of attrition or whatever, they're generating 7 attack dice, and you can go up to 14 if you have the ability to do that. You can gain 7 more dice.
Sure.
And the thing about the javelins is they get that +1 when they charge. Now, there, all of a sudden, it's like a heavy weapon with a stipulation there that they can't close ranks. So I'm going to target mounted troops. I'm going to, range troops like the bows, the crossbows, javelin units, other javelin units. I want to hit them, and don't forget though, like hitting a mounted warlord with a unit of 7 javelin warriors. That's not a bad idea. Um, so they can field in the early game. They can be chucking javelins, and then they can turn around and hit hard. I traded up with the Norse Gale. I took a unit of javelin warriors, and they were getting chased around the board by 6 Hearthguard, and lo and behold, I turned around and charged those Hearthguards, and I lost 6 warriors, but they lost 6 Hearthguards.
Yep.
They didn't. It's like, wow, they can't. There's no way. Boom, I did it. Because that's a shock troop. When the timing is right, and that's the key with the shock troops, you're going in when they have fatigue. So your opponent has a fatigue. Now I've got something to work with. If they've got 2 fatigues, now I really have something to work with, because I can bump my armor and lower theirs with that +1.
Got some options, yeah.
You got some options there, and that can really, really hurt. It's like every time you have a fatigue on an opponent, that fatigue is like having a saga dice in my mind. So, it's like, to me, that's an extra saga dice. If they got 2 fatigues, that's 2 extra saga dice, like, because I'm lowering their armor twice, or I'm bumping mine up.
Yeah, well, you can even, usually those abilities that increase your armor are 2-die abilities. Yeah. So it's like almost like 2, 4, 6. If they're exhausted, plus a -1 to hit, that's a 2-die ability as well. So it's like,
and a lot of the boards,
saga dice.
Yeah, I mean that +1 to hit is a 2-dice ability. Like
quite a few different boards in Crusades. There they have something like that. So just huge.
But, you got that duality there, so they can just chuck javelins, pepper people, whittle away, and then when the moment's right, they might take out a unit, or like you guys in that last video, like you're hunting saga dice. You're hunting saga dice. So if like I got an opponent's unit that looks like I can take out a saga dice, I'm going to do that. And this, unit, can do that. It's got that dual role of being able to switch from harassment to hitting hard.
Well, and you can hit hard first, and then do your shooting, as an opportunity, see what happened after you did all your attacks.
And that's a Raj, move right there. I've heard you say that forever, and it is smart. You think about it. You charge in, and if you can raise your armor and you survive, and then you just
as long as you keep the guys alive, to be able to shoot.
And then while the other, guys like, recovering from the melee, you just throw javelins at them, and it's free. You're not going to get, so if you charge in after the combat, you get a fatigue, they get a fatigue, you can throw those javelins in after them. And here's the kicker. I do that always. Why? Because even if I don't kill anything, more than likely they're going to spend my fatigue.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now I'm fatigued.
If they have 4 warriors or whatever, and you're.
Yeah. They're gonna spend my fatigue to raise their armor. Now I'm fatigue free, and they are not. So those skirmish shock troops, the crossover troops, they are great for that. Like I think that's one of my favorite troops, and like I use them in the Carolingians, because the Carolingians can take Hearthguard with javelins, and so you're peppering them all day long. Now hear me out here. If I had a 6-pack of Hearthguard with javelins, I can, ride up. They get a free shot, so they're going to generate 6 attack dice, right? Well, I can play a door, and I can get 6 more. So I've already thrown 12 dice at them, and then I can attack. I can charge with no fatigue with another ability. And now I've just peppered that unit with 24 attack dice.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate shock troop there is, being able to do that. And that's because of the javelin. And there are other factions. The Saracens have javelin hearth guards, I believe. Oh no, wait, not them. I can't. There are some other ones out there.
The Moors, I don't
The
know.
Moors, yeah, that's yeah. And so that routine of going up and shooting, and especially if you can charge in with no fatigue, if you got an ability to slough that fatigue off, that's really amazing.
Yeah. So it kind of seems, it just has the flexibility is kind of some of the power,
Well, a guy like you is going to be able to play that, and as beginners, you kind of like, it's too complicated at first, but as you get some games under your belt, I think you're going to find the crossover. Now, it's not like you're going to have a whole army full of them necessarily, unless you're playing a faction that really based in javelins.
Yeah, some are, that's the whole thing. But
yeah,
the trick is keeping them safe until it's time to deliver.
Right. Yeah. you got to remember they're more vulnerable. Even the Hearthguard, their armor's 4/4. It's not 5 anymore. You can't close ranks if they're mounted. You can't even close ranks if they're on the foot because of the javelin. So you've got to protect them, and you can use them as a skirmisher, keep them out of trouble, and protecting them. But you got to remember, these guys are going to go in at the right moment. I usually use these guys in like turn 3 or 4 when I'm trying to turn the tide of the game. And there's that one big moment, like, oh, if I take out that critical unit, a high value unit, that's going to be it. Or I can get a Saga dice, maybe 2 Saga dice on this turn. I can reduce my opponent, and then I'll be sitting pretty. So there's something you hold back. You're not necessarily putting them out front early, unless they're highly mobile. I'll do that with the Hearthguards that are mounted. I'll just move them out, shoot, move them back, and keep them protected. But they're going to go out and pepper stuff. I like to do that with some against like range targets. So like if they've got levy bowed levy, I can ride the Hearthguard out, take some shots, back them off, get them out of range. Especially if they leave them out in the open. If they put them in cover, it gets harder. But there are some boards that have abilities to deal with that.
Sure. So awesome. Yeah, I agree. Not every board or faction really has a troop that meets the requirements here, but if you got them,
the quintessential faction is the Spanish.
Yeah.
They're jinetes, the javelin warriors. They actually have an ability that when you play, it's an orders ability, that all your charges, you get 2 bonus attack dice on the javelins.
Oh, yeah, that's tasty.
Oh my gosh, yeah. If you time that right, even it's really good late game when you've got depleted units. Maybe they're not even generating Saga dice anymore. But you got 3 warriors, and all of a sudden they hit and they got 5 attack dice. So they're really good for mopping up. But they do that really, really well. So,
right. Well, we just have support troops left. So these guys didn't make it on the bullet point sheets. I didn't make a banner for them, but
I ran out of time for it.
No worries. So is this a just like archers essentially, or is it something different?
The quintessential is archers. A range. You're looking at bows, slings, crossbows, and they're either going to be levy or warriors, typically. However, certain factions, you've got to think about support troops in many different ways. For example, and you play the Nordscale, so this will make sense. The levy aren't just throwing javelins. They're supporting the other troops in there because of certain abilities that allow you to shift fatigues off of your Hearthguard, your warriors, or your warlord that's in melee. So and the reason I call that a support troop, that's another option. But the range guys, they're going to control area. You're going to plop them in some cover. They're going to control area. So anybody that's going there, they're going to be facing shots and stuff like that, and they're going to get attrition. So it's really good to use them that way. The other thing is certain boards, there are abilities that enhance other troops. The Byzantine, for example, some of their best abilities, you have to have support troops near them. So like in the Byzantines, I'll field a couple of units of mounted warriors or other troops near other troops, so that you can play those abilities, because you have to be within S of another troop in order to gain that ability. Or you get the amount of dice you get is based on those troops. So I have in the back, I'll have some small troops that I can move around to enhance those abilities. Those are what I also call support troops. The third, you've already talked about it, and that is the Saga Battery.
Yeah, that's good.
Having that Saga Battery, that 4-pack of warriors stuffed in the back somewhere. For like the Byzantines, I do have that Saga Battery in the back, but he's also enhancing the abilities. So look at support troops as either A, arranged, so they're going to add harassment value to control an area, so they're going to aid your melee troops, or for utilizing or enhancing abilities on your Saga board. And then the third is Saga dice generation. I take that mindset. It's not just about shooting. Now, with almost all of that, especially like the first two, positioning is the key. Being able to position the units and get them into areas where you need them. And this actually goes all the way back to when you start the game and place your terrain. I've seen people place, their hard cover, 2 inches from the back line, and, okay, go ahead, throw your bow levy in there, go right ahead. I'm not going anywhere near that. And I don't need to, because then, it's too far back. So think about where you're placing your terrain. Where are you going to want those range guys, that range levy unit, to support your troops? And then that's where you're going to kind of place terrain and make sure that you can get them there. So that's important. And then the other is maintaining the support of like if you've got 2 units that have to be close together. One situation that everybody has is the bodyguards rule with your warlord. And you've talked about it before. It's like it's the figures within S. So you've got to think about, making sure that you've got that support unit close enough to your warlord that it can actually be utilized. If you've got him too far away and he starts taking, casualties and he can't slough them off, well, that's no good. So I always tell people measure twice,
Yeah, definitely. Oh, good deal. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's pretty straightforward, I think, with the support troops. But like you said, you want to use terrain if you can to get them into a good protected spot and control or contest some area. But if sometimes you lose the terrain game, but you got to get them out there. Your example of putting them back in the difficult terrain or whatever, and they're deep in their deployment zone, is not doing any good. Got to get them out there, generally, in my opinion, because nobody they have to have a plan going up against those, because nobody wants to take those 6 shots. We've already talked about the power of the 6 shot. Nobody wants to voluntarily take that. And so even if you're in the open, they'll spend a disproportionate amount of resources sometimes avoiding or just throwing everything in it to try to get them off. So, yeah.
Don't be afraid to take them out of the cover. Like I've seen people plop that levy in that unit and they put them like in the back corner in some forest, and then but then they leave them there the whole game. If if they're on the right flank, you're just going to shift left and go around. Well, bring them out. You'll need to have a unit to protect them, but you can do that. But yeah,
Yeah.
don't leave them back because they're not doing any good. But the other thing is don't put them on the front line. You know.
Yeah.
Um,
The thing too is with those guys, if you got to keep them out of terrain, uh, just be really careful about leaving fatigues on them and overactivating. So I'll just keep them squeaky clean. I'll move up. I won't take the shot because I'll take a fatigue. So I'm just gonna move up. Put the threat there, and as long as you maintain that armor 3, you'd be surprised at what kind of stuff people will throw at those guys. And then it's just they got the lovey mojo, lovey magic going on. As long as you keep them fresh, if they're hitting on 2s, it's a lot harder for bad luck to intervene. But if you keep them at 3s, those 2s, those 1s and 2s, can show up out of all disproportion.
yeah, you're spot on that. No, I think that's good. So, but
Okay.
cool.
Well, yeah, we've been talking over an hour now. We've got the different pieces, the components. Can you put it all together for us? Maybe an example of how, with these concepts, you would build a warband, or think about the troops that you would use for your Huns or your Ordnance shot or any faction like that. How?
Well, I'll take a look at your model of 1 point of Hearthguard, 4 points of Warrior, 1 point of Levy.
Sure.
I'll start from the bottom, work up. That point of Levy, if I can, I'm going to take them as a support troop, and then I'll try and take the Hearthguard as a shock troop, if I have that option. If not, they might be a support troop for the Warlord and just be on foot next to them. And then your warriors, we've talked about it. I'm gonna have at least 10, probably 10, maybe 12 as your front line. And then if you've got other weapon options with those warriors, then the remaining figures that you have, I'll break those up into suitable units with those weapons to create some shock troops with those, or some skirmish if I have that option. So I mean that's kind of what I'm going to do. So I've got some range. I'm going to have a unit of ranged. And again, this is generic. I'm going to have Hearthguard that'll be like a shock troop. I may have a warrior unit that's a shock troop, but then I'm going to have a big front line unit, and then I'll have, with the rest of the warriors, I'll make up either a skirmish unit or maybe 2 units of frontliners if I think I need it. Caveat to that is your board will dictate that.
Yeah, it's so hard to, kind of give an overall template like that, because some factions will only have 3 of these options. They don't have archers.
Right.
And, so the levy become the skirmish type just off the outset. There's some rare factions without really an obvious shock troop option. Like you said, most have it, but not all. The skirmish shock troop, the mounted javelins, or good warrior javelin blocks. Not every war band's going to have that. So right out the gate, you're going to be kind of down to 2 or 3 or 4 of these. But I kind of like the concept here as you've laid out, because I think it'll speed up deployment and placing saga dice, because every troop then has like a role. So it's not like every unit war, what am I going to do with these guys? I guess I'll charge them off over here. You've got the troops. This is what their role is. So I'm going to keep my shock troops back. So I'm going to move up the dice and the skirmishers for now, or however many number of ways can go off that. But it gives you kind of like a framework to thinking about deployment and spending your dice. That was it.
Yeah, Yeah, no, you're right. And like when you're looking at your board, you have to kind of look at what your board will offer, and that will kind of determine what you're doing. For example, skirmishers, which are probably the harder one to play, you have to have on the board to be really good at skirmishing, where you want to kind of emphasize that. You either have to have some abilities that enhance the shooting, or you got to have abilities that give you multi activations without fatigue, preferably. But then that board will kind of determine how many skirmishers you take. If you have an ability like in the Age of Invasion Romans, the Roman faction, you can field a unit of composite bow warriors because they have an ability that will enhance their shooting and make it extremely effective. But
Sure.
you're only going to be able to play that on one unit. But then you contrast that with the Huns or the Mongols, where they have multi-activation. And, with the Huns, for example, it's fatigue free. Well, that sets up lots of units of skirmishers. And so you're going in with, typically I'm going to have 4 units of skirmishers, and I'm sending 2 or 3 in a turn. And so, you gotta look at the board. And so the Huns, I still have frontliners because I've got to get those skirmishers behind them. So I'm going to have, but I don't have a lot of options with certain factions. Some factions, they're harder to play. Like the Carolingians are harder to play, the Ordstat are harder to play, and the Age of Invasion Romans are harder to play because you have so many options.
Sure. Yeah.
You've got a lot of troop options. So what I tell people is look at what your board leans towards, and then that'll help you define what you're going to do. But from a generic standpoint, what I said earlier will apply to a lot of factions, but not all of them. It's really like the way you play the pagan people. It's really unique. I'm terrible at the pagan people. That thing eludes me. I've played it a few times. And I'm like, man, it's just I got to figure this one out.
Sure.
But other boards, like wow, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to do it that way. But study the board, study your troop options, and you'll figure out a play style. And just enjoy that,
Yeah.
If you lose, who cares? I mean, I got beat by the Milton Christie on the last turn recently, and I was playing the Huns, and I was having a lot of fun, but the player beat me, and but I stuck to the play style of that faction, and I had a lot of fun doing it. Almost won the game, but lost it.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I think that's a good spot to kind of end it here with those words of wisdom, kind of uplifting us. Patrick, thanks for coming on and giving us your thoughts. And I know you've got a lot more thoughts about various aspects of Saga, so perhaps we'll have you on to discuss those at some point. But really appreciate you coming on. You talked about an event in our kind of pre-chat. Is that on the books yet? A tournament or anything in your area that you're setting up?
I'm going to be setting one up this year. I wanted to do it last year, but just didn't happen for various reasons. But I'm gonna get one up. I'll let you know when I get the details worked out. I've been working on the scenarios, and I think I've got them dialed. And so I think this one's going to be just fun. I mean, it's
awesome. Yeah.
It's going to be off the Monty Python theme, so it'll be kind of fun.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good metric to be shooting for. Sometimes TOs, you're looking for competition or the perfect system to figure out who's going to come out on top. I think fun should be the most important metric for any event. So yeah. I agree with you. All right, man. Well, it's been a blast chatting with you today, and we'll do it again real soon. I'll talk to you later. All right. Bye. Saga. like to see more Saga content, consider joining the Heathen Army over on Patreon or popping on down to the Saga Thursday Discord server. Links below. Thanks, guys.